Spring 1819, Georgetown, South Carolina. The river lay wide and green-brown under a sky that sweated heat, its marshes stitched with rice like a rich man's quilt. From the road came iron and dust and the measured clink of chains. 17 people, roped in a line, walked the final mile to Fairhaven Plantation, 200 acres of bottomland and a reputation that traveled faster than any carriage. The owner, Marcus Hewitt, grew rice and fear in equal measure. The first he sold by the barrel, the second he kept on hand. Silas Drummond, overseer for 23 years, waited at the yard's edge with a ledger under his arm and a whip resting lazy across his shoulder. He had the face of a man carved from desiccated leather, eyes that weighed people like bales. He preferred the task system. It dressed cruelty in arithmetic, as if a daily quota could launder the violence required to wring it from flesh. The coffle halted. Dust settled. In that brief hush, the only sounds were bellows sighing from the forge, flies tasting sweat, and the river's slow breath beyond the cypress. A man near the center of the line stood straighter than the rest, not by defiance but by habit, as if some inner brace kept him level no matter who tugged the rope. Auction lists called him Samuel. Blacksmith, they'd scrawled, approximately 26, bought off the carcass of a bankrupt estate. His shoulders carried years of iron. His hands were a map of callous and memory. He looked at Fairhaven the way a craftsman inspects a flawed hinge. Cool, measuring, already sorting its weaknesses. Beside him, Clara, his wife, kept her palm hidden in his, a quiet rebellion against the order not to touch. The march had carved hollows beneath her eyes. She had concealed the curve of 4 months' pregnancy beneath loose cloth and careful stillness. Knowing mercy and danger often wore the same face here. Their 2 children were gone inland to other ledgers. Samuel had watched the sale without a cry. Some griefs harden as they cool. Drummond stalked the line, stopping where Samuel stood. Name? He asked, not because he cared, but because the ledger demanded a label before a lash. Samuel, the man said. Skills? Smithing. Drummond's stare drifted to the thick wrists, the breadth of chest, the way Samuel absorbed his gaze and gave nothing back. You'll take the fields for now, he said. Forge is spoken for. Samuel nodded once. The exchange left an aftertaste in the air, the way metal smells different the instant before it bends. Fair. Haven's quarters lay in strict rows behind the big house. 40 weather-grade cabins made tight to save the lumber and drafty to save the conscience. Each held 6 or 8 souls, the walls breathing mosquitoes in summer and cold in winter. Samuel and Clara were sent to cabin 14, where rough plank bunks had learned the curve of many backs. New faces glanced up. A driver with tired authority. 2 children, who had already learned how to make themselves small. An old woman whose silence was less fear than the discipline of survival. At dawn the next day, the swamp light broke green and low across the rice. The work began in water, ankle-deep, snake-thick, fever-sweet. In the low country, rice is not a crop so much as a calculus of mud, tide, and muscle. Under the task system, each person's day fit neatly on paper and never in the body. Plant this much, weed that much. Harvest until your back becomes a hinge and your hands a set of tools that belong to someone else. Samuel learned the rhythm with the speed of a man who understood. That rhythm was the difference between punishment and breath. He bent, planted, rose, moved. The sun skated higher. Drivers called the pace. Drummond appeared and dissolved, always somewhere, never nowhere. In the distance, the forge's bellows exhaled like a sleeping animal with its own dreams. But Samuel worked with a second gaze, the one that weighs a place. He watched the overseer's routes and moods, the hours the drivers favored a certain levee path, the small power held by a cook who could afford to listen, the larger power held by silence. He marked where a tool lay after it broke, who lifted it, how quickly the complaint reached the big house. Noted, stored. A blacksmith's mind keeps measurements even without a rule. Clara lasted longer than her body had any right to. She hid the nausea, walked with the steady gait of someone refusing to be measured by pity. But hunger compounds heat, and heat compounds work, and work compounds everything. The morning she fell, the day had just begun to bloom its worst. She was carrying water for the field hands, eyes set on the path between rows, when her knees buckled. The bucket toppled, a small river briefly born in a world already made of water. She kissed mud, went still. The hands nearest her moved first, women lifting her head from the slurry. A young boy flapping his hat to keep flies off her lips, an older man cursing softly in a language older than the plantation itself. The driver sent a runner. Drummond arrived with impatience already lit in his face. He looked down as if taking inventory. "Sick house," he said. "Her task still stands." He turned to Samuel. "You'll finish hers on top of yours." The field slowed without appearing to. In that delicate drag of time, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, everybody watched the space between the overseer's words and the blacksmith's answer. "No," Samuel said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The syllable landed with the weight of a hammer that has found its mark. Drummond's jaw flexed. He wasn't unused to resistance, pleading, bargaining, even the shiver of rage that flares and dies when the whip comes out. But this wasn't heat. It was calculation spoken aloud. "What did you say?" "You'll tend to my wife proper," Samuel said, voice almost conversational. "Call the doctor. See that she lives and the child with her. Then I'll do both tasks." The audacity wasn't in the demand. It was in the grammar. A man in chains using the language of terms. Around them, backs bent slightly lower in the pretense of work, ears cocked sharply higher in the practice of community. "You're bold for someone I can lay open," Drummond said, sliding the whip's tail along the mud just enough to etch a promise. "You can," Samuel agreed. "You can whip me until there's no back left to whip. But you won't get another minute of labor until she's seen, and Mr. Hewitt will count the cost of that choice." It was smart, and he meant it to be. Percy doesn't travel well where profit rules, but profit listens when addressed by name. Drummond's expression walked a path from fury to arithmetic. He spat. "Fine, doctor comes. You finish both. You fail once, I'll carve the lesson into both of you." Samuel lifted Clara from the mud, careful with her head and the life inside her. The hands stepped back, making a narrow, reverent aisle. Fear and a thin, bright thing that might have been hope moved through the field together. The doctor arrived late, young and bored, made more of fees than of people. He declared bed rest or death, nutrition or loss. Drummond carried the verdict like a rotten fruit he still had to accept. Yet, facing acres of nearly ready rice and a tidy column of numbers in his head, allowed 1 week of rest for Clara, on the condition that Samuel rack up 2 men's work every day. What happened next stitched itself into memory so deep that even whispers decades later kept its shape. Samuel did the impossible because he decided to, and because decision, the pure, stubborn act of will, sometimes drags the body along behind it. He rose before the river gathered light, bled before breakfast, finished his task by noon. Then he started hers, and people noticed. In the cracks that cruelty leaves, the 15 stolen minutes, the shade that looks like rest, others drifted to his row. A woman weeded half a length while tying her headscarf. A boy looked for a dropped tool and planted 3 hills. An old man paused to stretch and pulled a skein of crabgrass like he'd been born for it. No speeches, no meetings, just a choreography of small choices that together became a shield. By the 4th day, Drummond saw the pattern. It wasn't Samuel that worried him anymore. One man with iron in his spine is manageable, tiresome but manageable. A community remembering itself is something else. He said nothing then. Night would offer a stage for the lesson he preferred. Evening brought torches and an audience. Drummond called Samuel from cabin 14. 3 overseers flanked him, each with that bored violence men wear when they have practiced a thing until it feels like duty. Clara braced in the doorway, white-lipped, eyes lit with something that refused to leave. "You got help," Drummond said. "That wasn't our bargain." "I finished both tasks," Samuel answered. "You inspected." You nodded. What others did, they did on their time. That's within your precious arithmetic. Drummond's smile was all teeth and no humor. "Shirt," he said. Samuel stripped it off. His back told a history nobody had bothered to write. Scars crossing scars, old reliefs of healed leather, fresh lines that still remembered fire. The whip hissed. Flesh opened. He made no sound. By the 10th stroke, the torches no longer owned the light. His blood did. "Kneel," Drummond said. Samuel stayed standing. "Kneel." "So you can break my legs," Samuel said, voice steady in a way that chills horses. "But I won't kneel to a man who thinks he owns me." Silence rolled over the yard, heavy, total, a silence that knows it is witnessing a line being drawn. The whip rose again, but another voice cut the night. "That's enough, Silas." Marcus Hewitt stepped from the dark edge of the crowd, whiskey on his breath and calculus in his eyes. He studied Samuel as a botanist might inspect a stubborn graft. "Pride," he said lightly. "Either you beat it out or it burns the man who holds it. Which will it be with you?" "Time will tell," Samuel said. Hewitt almost smiled. "For now it tells me I've got a field to harvest and a woman to keep alive for my ledger's sake. End this for tonight." He turned to the quarters. Back inside. "Mercy is ours to give, not yours to claim." As the people dispersed, Hewitt leaned close enough that only Samuel could hear. "You have two dangerous things, blacksmith, wit and will. I see both, and I don't miss what I see." The torches guttered. The night took back its sounds, crickets rehearsing, the low thrum of the river, and the yard emptied. In cabin 14, Clara dabbed Samuel's back with a rag dipped in cool water, her hands careful, her face hard as a vow. He lay still and counted breaths until they lined up again. At dawn, he rose to meet the fields because he had promised, and because promises, once spoken aloud, own you in a way even chains do not. By week's end, Clara's pulse steadied. The doctor called it rest. The quarters called it miracle. Samuel called it necessary. Then November found Fairhaven's smith, old Joseph, and took him quick with fever. The forge fell silent. Hundreds of edges dulled on cue. Hinges began to complain. The plantation's iron forgot its discipline. Hewitt remembered the ledger line that read blacksmith, and the man who had refused to kneel. 2 days after Joseph's burial, he reassigned Samuel to the anvil, not as a kindness, but as a way to keep danger where he could see it. The forge stood 50 yards from the big house, close enough for Hewitt to watch the glow from his study window and know precisely when iron went soft. And that is where the true work, the kind that changes men and plantation, would begin. The first dawn Samuel spent in the forge felt like the first breath after drowning. Hot, heavy, uncertain whether it meant life or just another kind of suffocation. The building stood like a red-bricked beast just 50 yards from the master's veranda, close enough that Hewitt could watch the fire through his study window and feel reassured that both iron and man were being kept under control. The air inside was a living thing, smoke, heat, and the metallic tang that sits at the back of the throat like a coin. For the first few hours, Samuel worked under the eye of Silas Drummond, who lounged in the doorway with a musket across his knees, pretending disinterest. But the overseer wasn't there to supervise quality. He was there to study temper. Samuel ignored him. He worked the way a man works when the anvil is the only thing that still makes sense. Methodical, rhythmic, each hammer strike a heartbeat turned into metal. Sparks showered like fireflies, bouncing off his scarred back. His arms moved with practiced memory. Even the bellows seemed to follow his breathing. The plantation had been waiting for the blacksmith to return. Tools piled in corners, blades dulled from harvest, hinges whining, chains rusting. He repaired everything. The pace he set was impossible for one man, but Samuel wasn't just mending iron. He was measuring his cage. By the third day, something curious began to happen. Field hands passing the forge on errands slowed their steps to watch. The sound of Samuel's hammer carried across the yard, deep, deliberate, almost musical. Some said he was shaping iron into weapons. Others said he was sending messages through rhythm, codes struck in steel that only the enslaved could hear. The rumors reached the quarters before sunset. "He's talking to the fire," one woman whispered. Fire answers him. It wasn't superstition. It was need, the human instinct to believe that someone somewhere had found a way to turn pain into power. Hewitt's curiosity overcame his suspicion by the end of the first week. He visited the forge one humid evening, glass of whiskey in hand. "I've had blacksmiths before," Hewitt said, circling the room, "but I've never seen anyone work with that kind of precision." Samuel didn't look up. "Precision keeps the metal from splitting," he said. Hewitt smiled thinly. "And what keeps the man from splitting?" "The same thing," Samuel said, striking the anvil again. The spark that flew landed at Hewitt's feet. For a moment neither spoke. Then Hewitt set down his glass and leaned closer. "You think I don't see what's brewing in you, boy? That fire of yours, I'll use it till it dies." Samuel met his eyes, hammer still in hand. "Fire don't die," he said. "It just waits for air." Hewitt left without another word, but that night he ordered Drummond to lock the forge. After dusk, locked doors never stopped a man who understood hinges. By the following month, Samuel had duplicated keys, small, crude, but effective. He began working at night, silent except for the measured whisper of the bellows. The other enslaved men who handled iron, nailers, coopers, cartwrights, found small tools left near their cabins, sharpened awls, tempered wedges, hinges that turned smoother than any sold in Charleston. No one spoke of them, but everyone noticed. Drummond noticed too. One night, hearing the forge's breath after midnight, he crept to the window and peered inside. Samuel stood bare-chested before the anvil, hammering something the overseer couldn't quite see. The sound was slower than normal, not work rhythm but ceremony. Sparks lifted, then died, and Samuel just stared into the coals as if they were eyes staring back. Drummond felt the small hairs on his neck rise. He told himself it was superstition, just heat and exhaustion. But when Samuel turned suddenly and looked directly at the window, the overseer stumbled backward like he'd been caught spying on God. He didn't mention it to Hewitt. He couldn't explain it without sounding weak. December came with chill winds that pushed the river fog inland. The fields went brown, work slowed, but unease did not. In the quarters, small things began to happen. Tools vanished, then reappeared sharper. A cart axle broke and was mysteriously repaired overnight. The locks on the storage sheds grew loose, though no one ever saw them opened. Samuel said little, but his silence had weight. People started visiting the forge on pretexts, a sickle to mend, a pot handle to fix, and left with more than they'd brought. Hope, mostly. Then one morning Hewitt woke to find the great iron gate at the plantation's entrance, standing wide open. Its locking bar neatly removed and laid aside, no sign of force. Drummond swore he'd closed it. Hewitt's fury was volcanic. Every gate, every chain, every lock, and you tighten them all. If I find so much as a loose hinge, I'll have your hide for it. That evening Hewitt rode to the forge himself, a pistol tucked under his coat. He found Samuel at work, sweat shining on his back. "You touched that gate?" Hewitt asked. "No, sir," Samuel said. "But maybe the gate's just tired of being closed." Hewitt struck him across the face with the pistol butt. The blow split Samuel's lip, but he neither flinched nor wiped the blood. "You'll remember your place," Hewitt hissed. Samuel's voice was low, controlled. "I remember everything." Hewitt left the forge shaking, not from exertion but from the cold realization that fear had changed sides. That night, the overseers heard metal screaming from the forge, the shriek of iron being forced into shape too fast, too hard. Then silence. When they opened the doors at dawn, Samuel was gone. On the anvil lay something no one understood, an iron mask, still warm, shaped like a human face twisted in defiance. Clara sat outside cabin 14, holding baby Ruth, eyes dry, lips murmuring a song older than the plantation. From that morning, Fairhaven would never be the same. Tools began breaking faster than they could be repaired. Horses bolted for no reason. And at night, some swore they heard the ring of a hammer from the empty forge, steady, distant, and getting closer. Morning came thick with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and made even the birds forget their songs. Fairhaven stood uneasy. The forge door hung open, its hinges black with soot. The anvil was cold now, the mask still lying where Samuel had left it, half human, half warning. Silas Drummond stared at it from the threshold, arms folded, jaw working. The overseer had seen blood, rebellion, and madness on more plantations than he cared to count. But this felt different. It wasn't what was missing that frightened him. It was what remained. By noon, the rumor had already crossed every cabin. He's gone. Not escaped. Gone. The word carried weight. Clara said nothing. She sat outside cabin 14 with Ruth pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on the horizon. When people asked where Samuel went, she would only say, "He's working." That answer unsettled them more than silence. The searchwit lost composure faster than anyone had ever seen. He ordered a full search, dogs, riders, torches sweeping through the marsh. For 3 days they scoured the rice fields, the levees, the cypress groves along the Wacamo. They found footprints leading toward the riverbank, but they ended in smooth mud as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Whit's temper became legend that week. He whipped 3 men for withholding information and fined Drummond half his pay for incompetence. But anger couldn't mask what everyone felt. a pulse of fear humming beneath the normal order of cruelty. On the fourth night, the first overseer quit. He didn't pack or ask for pay, just left before dawn, muttering that he'd seen light in the forge after midnight and heard hammering when no one was there. Drummond laughed it off publicly, but each night he started drinking earlier. The signs it began small. Nails split when struck, hose snapped mid-swing, chains rusted overnight. Then the accidents grew violent. One morning, a storage barn door came loose and crushed a driver's leg, the hinge pins sheared clean, as if filed from the inside. 2 days later, a plough blade shattered in the field, sending shards that opened a man's throat. Drummond found the blacksmith's hammer wedged into the broken plough, buried handle deep in the soil. He didn't tell Hewitt. He just threw it into the river and drank himself blind, but the sound came back that night, rhythmic, metallic, slow. The ring of a hammer against steel, somewhere between the river and the big house. The dogs refused to go near the forge. The fear by the second week, half the enslaved workers whispered prayers before dusk. They left offerings near the forge, bits of bread, broken tools, a child's toy carved from wood. Clara never joined them. She simply whispered to the wind, "Work, Samuel, work." Hewitt ordered the forge sealed. Bricks were stacked across the doorway. Mortar poured thick. For 2 days it stayed silent. Then on the third night, the bricks cracked from within. Not burst, cracked like ribs under strain. The men who'd sealed it refused to go back. Hewitt's accountant suggested burning it down. "Fire cleans," he said. But Hewitt couldn't bear the thought of destroying his tools or the anvil that had served his family for decades. "It's iron," he snapped. "It can't haunt." He was wrong. The vigil on the last Sunday of December 1822, the plantation gathered for forced worship in the quarters. Reverend Patterson, the same young doctor who had once examined Clara, read from the book of Job about obedience and suffering. As he spoke, a sound cut through the humid air. Clang, 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 slow, measured, distant. The Reverend stopped mid-verse. Every head turned toward the forge. The sound continued. 12 strikes, then silence. Drummond stood, hand trembling, toward his pistol. "Stay here," he barked, though his voice cracked. He and 2 men took torches and crossed the yard. They reached the forge. The door, once bricked shut, now stood open just a hand's width. Inside, the anvil glowed faintly, though no fire burned. On it rested the mask again. Cleaned, polished, its expression changed. The mouth, once twisted in defiance, now smiled. Drummond dropped his torch. It hit the ground and died. He didn't speak for the rest of the night. The aftermath. By January 1823, Fair Haven was unraveling. Overseers came and left. Yields dropped. Tools broke faster than they could be replaced. Hewitt grew paranoid, ordering nightly patrols around his house. Clara was moved to domestic work near the kitchen. For safety, Hewitt claimed, though the truth was simpler. He wanted to keep her where he could see her. But she never looked at him. Every evening she would step outside, lift Ruth in her arms, and hum the same lullaby she'd sung before Samuel vanished. And each night, somewhere in the distance, a hammer answered her song. By February 1823, the air around Fair Haven had turned thick, not just with the swamp's humidity, but with something you could feel pressing on your skin. The hammering had stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. The plantation had gone brittle. Tools broke, tempers broke, sleep broke. Every night felt too long, every dawn too sudden. Even the river seemed to keep its distance. Marcus Hewitt, once proud of his precision, now looked like a man who couldn't count fast enough to keep up with his losses. The numbers in his ledger no longer balanced. 1 overseer gone mad, 2 run off, 1 crushed in a fall no one saw happen. He told himself it was coincidence. The low country was full of accidents. But deep down the arithmetic was turning against him, and then came the first death that couldn't be explained away. The overseer's false Silas. Drummond was found face down in the marsh behind the forge one morning, half submerged in water so shallow it couldn't have drowned him. His skin was blue-black from more than the chill. There wasn't a mark on him. No bruises, no cuts, nothing human in what killed him. His eyes, though, were wide open, staring toward the forge like a man seeing something that didn't belong in this world. Hewitt ordered him buried that same day. Accident, he said flatly, before anyone could call it anything else. But everyone in the quarters knew. They'd seen the tracks, not footprints, drag marks, 2 lines gouged into the mud, as if something heavy had pulled Drummond by the ankles while he clawed at the ground. No one said Samuel's name aloud, but they all thought it. That night Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window with Ruth in her arms, watching the fog rise. Around midnight she whispered, "That's one," and smiled through tears. The new overseer. Within a week, a new man arrived from Charleston. Younger, meaner, paid double to restore order. His name was Henry Keene, a man whose reputation preceded him like the smell of gunpowder. He carried 2 pistols and a riding whip braided with lead. When he walked through the quarters on his first day, people lowered their eyes not from fear but calculation. They'd seen monsters before. This one just happened to wear cleaner boots. Keene decided he'd make an example to stamp out the unease that had infected the plantation. He chose an old man named Amos, caught whispering stories about the vanished blacksmith. Keene tied Amos to the whipping post and lashed him 13 times, then 14, then 15. The crowd didn't cry or flinch. They just watched, hollow-eyed. When it was done, Amos sagged forward and whispered something none of them forgot. "He's behind you." Keene turned, whip raised. Nothing there. Just fog rolling thick across the yard. He laughed it off, but that night he woke screaming. Claimed something had pulled the blanket off his bed and wrapped around his throat. His horse was found the next morning, its bit twisted and mangled as if chewed by iron teeth. Whit told him it was vermin. Keene stopped laughing after that. The hammer returns. March brought the sound back. Faint at first. A single strike, then 2 echoing across the swamp long after midnight. Workers began refusing to go near the forge, even during daylight. One morning a boy sent to fetch water from the well came back pale, stammering. It's there," he said. "In the fire." When they followed him, the forge was cold. But in the ash lay a handprint, large, burned deep into the brick, fingers spread wide. Hewitt scraped it away himself, muttering about pranksters, but the next morning the print had returned, blacker, deeper, smoking faintly as if the ash refused to cool. That's when he finally sent for the magistrate. The magistrate's visit, Edward Leland, county magistrate, arrived from Georgetown 2 days later. Educated, skeptical, and fond of his own authority, he examined the forge, questioned the workers, and declared the plantation afflicted by hysteria. "Fear is contagious," he told Hewitt. "Your people believe this Samuel has returned, and belief, sir, is the most dangerous contagion of all." He wrote in his private journal that evening, the same journal historians would find in 1963. "We have created something we cannot control. God forgive us for what we did to make him this way." No one knew what he meant, but he left Fairhaven before sunset and never returned. Hitt read that line later and burned the page. The Reckoning. The deaths continued. Tools shattered in men's hands, blades kicked back, carts overturned without cause. Each accident claimed someone tied to Samuel's torment. A driver who'd jeered during the whipping, a field hand who'd reported Clara's pregnancy, a guard who'd once chained him at night. One by one they were found broken, twisted, sometimes untouched but lifeless, faces locked in horror, eyes burned white as if from sudden light. By April, the plantation's white staff had fled. Only Hewitt remained, too proud or too stubborn to leave what he called his empire. He moved into the attic of the big house, pistol under his pillow, lamp always burning. He could still hear it, that hammer. Always one strike short of dawn. Clara never saw him again after that month. Some said he shot himself. Others said the forge claimed him like it had claimed the rest. But the truth, whispered for decades in the rice fields, was simpler. When the slaves were freed and the Union troops came through in 1865, they found the big house empty, doors open, furniture overturned. In the forge on the anvil, they found a single object, a rusted pistol melted into iron, fused as if by impossible heat, and beside it, the faint imprint of a man's hand. When the war ended, the rice fields along the Waccamaw River went quiet. The overseers were gone, the masters fled, the slaves free, at least on paper. But Fairhaven Plantation didn't die like other estates. It lingered, as if the ground itself refused to let go. Union soldiers came through Georgetown in the summer of 1865, clearing what was left of the Confederate coast. They reached Fair Haven expecting another burned-out ruin. Instead, they found something worse, a place that felt abandoned mid-breath. The big house still stood, but every door gaped open. Chairs overturned, curtains torn as if by wind, though no wind blew. Dishes sat on the table, cracked but still holding mold where food had once been. Upstairs, the bed linens were shredded, the mattress soaked dark brown where Marcus Hewitt's pistol had fused into the iron frame itself. The air smelled faintly of rust and something else, sweet, metallic, like scorched blood. But it was the forge that drew their fear. The brick walls had blackened, but not burned. The roof had half collapsed, and inside the anvil glowed faintly under a thin layer of ash, as if the fire beneath had never gone out. On it lay a warped pistol, melted clean into the metal, and beside it, the impression of a human hand pressed deep into the anvil's surface. No heat could do that, they said. Not the kind known to men. The soldiers left before sunset. None of them spoke during the march back to Georgetown. One man swore that as they turned to go, the hammer struck once, clear and hollow, even though no one was there. The artifacts, 2 months later, an officer named Captain Ellis returned with a small detachment to catalogue abandoned properties for federal records. He was a rational man, northern-born, a believer in paperwork, not ghosts. When his men warned him about the blacksmith's curse, he laughed. Stories, he said. Old superstitions die harder than war. He ordered the melted pistol and the anvil shipped to Charleston for inspection, claiming they'd make fine curiosities for the new Freedmen's Bureau exhibit. He even took a brick from the forge as a keepsake, joking it would keep his hearth burning. By the time his transport reached Charleston, Ellis was dead. The coroner's report said heart failure. The soldiers who'd guarded the shipment said his tent filled with smoke in the middle of the night and thick, oily, stinking of hot iron. They dragged him out coughing, his hands blackened as if burned from within. Though the fire never touched him, the anvil was sent to a warehouse by the docks. The men who unloaded it refused to handle it bare-handed, after one of them sliced his palm on an edge that wasn't sharp. The cut didn't heal. It spread, black veins creeping up his arm until they reached his shoulder. He was buried before week's end. The foreman locked the warehouse and nailed a cross to the door. The records listed the contents as miscellaneous iron goods. Nobody claimed them again. Clara's return. Clara never saw that anvil again, but she returned to Fair Haven once. In 1871, 6 years after emancipation. She was thin but unbroken, carrying her daughter Ruth by the hand. The rice fields had gone wild, the cabins half swallowed by vine and silence. She walked the path to the forge and stood before its collapsed doorway. The air smelled of rain and rust. "You finished your work," she said softly. "But they'll never stop taking, will they?" She knelt, placed a small iron nail on the ground, and whispered a prayer in a tongue the land had forgotten, but the fire remembered. Then she and Ruth turned and walked away. Locals said that after she left, grass stopped growing around the forge. The soil stayed black, damp even in drought. No one built there again. The legend spreads by the 1880s. The story of the Fair Haven Smith had become a fireside tale told across 3 counties. Parents used it to hush children. Don't lie, don't steal, don't strike the weak. Or the blacksmith will come for your hands. But there were always those who went looking, a group of Georgetown men, treasure hunters. They called themselves, it came in 1894, hoping to dig up the cursed anvil. They carried lanterns and whiskey, mocking the locals who warned them. Only 2 came back. One couldn't speak for months. The other told his story to a preacher on his deathbed. We found the forge. The air was hot like summer, though frost lay thick outside. The anvil was gone, only a hollow where it had stood. Then the hammering started, slow, steady, coming from under the ground. And a voice said, "Keep working." He died the next morning. After that, no one entered the property again. The fire in Charleston decades later, in 1902, the warehouse in Charleston that had stored the miscellaneous iron goods caught fire. Witnesses said it started in the center of the building, no visible spark. The blaze burned so hot that nearby ships blistered where they floated. When the ashes cooled, they found one thing intact, the melted pistol fused into a lump of black steel, resting in the middle of the floor. The insurance report described it as an unidentified metallic mass resembling a handprint. The Clark, who wrote that line, resigned 2 days later. The warehouse was never rebuilt. The ground remained bare, as if the fire refused to let anything grow over its memory. The researchers, by the mid-20th century, historians began collecting oral accounts of the old plantations. Georgetown storykeepers still whispered about Fair Haven, about the man who defied his overseer and vanished into his own fire. In 1963, Professor Helen Albright from the University of South Carolina led a research team to locate the lost plantation records. They found fragments, receipts, ledgers, slave lists, and one other thing, a leather-bound journal belonging to Magistrate Edward Leland. The final page contained only one entry, dated 1824. "The thing we made is not of nature, it is of our sin. We built it from pain and iron, and it learned to remember. May God forgive us, for the blacksmith does not." The university sealed the journal in its archives, but Albright kept a photograph of that page on her desk for the rest of her life. She was found dead there in 1971, slumped over her notes, one hand still gripping the photo. The coroner noted a burn mark across her palm, in the shape of 5 fingers. Ruth's story, Ruth Whitt, she'd taken her father's surname after emancipation, lived quietly into old age. People called her the Smith's daughter, though few dared to ask her the truth. She became a midwife, known for her calm hands and the way she could ease pain with just a touch. When asked how she learned, she would smile faintly and say, "From someone who knew how to take it away." Before her death in 1910, she told one final story to a church elder. "My father's fire wasn't meant to kill," she said. "It was meant to remind. Every hammer strike was a prayer, for the ones who never got to rest. When the guilty heard it, they called it haunting. But for us, it was hope." She was buried beside her mother, not far from where Fair Haven once stood. On her grave, someone, no one knows who, and left a small iron nail. Clean, polished, rustless, the legacy today, Fair Haven is gone. The rice fields have become wetlands again, and the river has reclaimed most of the land. But on quiet nights, fishermen say they can still hear metal ringing through the fog, distant, slow, like the world itself remembering. Some say it's just the wind against old driftwood. Others say it's Samuel, still working, still shaping the iron of injustice into something that will outlast it. And if you walk the river path where the plantation once stood, the air turns heavy. Your ears ring, your skin prickles, and if you stay too long, you might feel a vibration through your boots, steady, rhythmic, like hammer against steel, the hammer that never stopped, the fire that never died, the man they tried to erase from history, still working beneath the earth. Time has a way of erasing history with polite efficiency. By the early 2000s, most people in Georgetown no longer remembered Fair Haven as anything more than a name on a fading map. The land had been sold, resold and forgotten under the legal language of undeveloped wetlands. But wetlands meant opportunity to the right kind of men, developers who saw only acreage and profit, not bones and ghosts beneath the soil. In the spring of 2003, a company called Wackamore Heritage Properties bought the site with plans to build a luxury golf resort. They called the project the Oaks at Fair Haven. The irony went unnoticed. Bulldozers arrived before sunrise one April morning, their engines growling over the sound of frogs and wind. The crew chief, a man named Evan Marlowe, had never heard the legend. He only cared about deadlines. But by noon, when the first machine hit something buried beneath the mud, the project changed, quietly, completely. The unearthed iron. The backhoe's bucket scraped against metal with a screech that cut through the air like a scream. The operator killed the engine and jumped down to inspect. What they'd hit wasn't pipe or debris. It was massive, half-buried, shaped roughly like a slab. They dug around it until the outline emerged, square, heavy, cold despite the heat, an anvil, still whole, still black, still impossibly clean. One of the men brushed off the dirt. When his fingers touched it, he hissed and jerked back. The others laughed until they saw the burn, a perfect handprint seared into his palm, dark as charcoal. Probably some chemical reaction, Marlowe muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. They loaded the anvil into the back of a truck to send to the county museum. That was the plan, but the museum never received it. The missing shipment. The driver, a 26-year-old named Carlos Whitman, left the site that afternoon. He never made it the 10 miles to Georgetown. The truck was found 2 days later, abandoned on the river road, engine running, doors open. Inside the cab, the radio was still on, playing a preacher's sermon through static. He who lives by the forge shall answer to it. The driver's seat was empty. On the dashboard lay a single black nail, too hot to touch. State police filed it as a missing persons case. The developers hushed it up. Accidents were bad for investors. Work resumed a week later. That's when the ground started to shake. The tremor. It wasn't an earthquake, at least not one the geological office could register. It was local, shallow, like the heartbeat of something stirring beneath the soil. The vibrations came every night around midnight, short bursts that rattled the construction trailers and knocked over tools. Marlowe told the crew it was soil settling. He said it often enough that he almost believed it. But one night, walking the site alone, he heard it. Clang, chul, clang, chul, clang. Metal on metal, distant but deliberate. He followed the sound through the fog toward the tree line, his flashlight slicing pale beams across the marsh. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Then the sound stopped, and the silence after felt alive, thick, waiting. When he turned back toward the trucks, he saw it. A faint orange glow pulsing under the mud near the old brick ruins of what had once been the forge. Marlowe ran. He never told the others what he saw. The first fire. A week later, the storage shed where they kept their tools went up in flames. The fire department arrived within minutes, but the blaze burned unnaturally fast, blue at the base, white at the center. When it was over, everything inside had turned to ash except one thing. The melted head of a hammer fused to a metal plate. Investigators ruled it spontaneous combustion due to chemical residue. The workers called it the curse. 2 quit that same day. Another was hospitalized after a steel girder slipped from a crane and crushed his foot, the same foot, he said, that had stepped on something hard and warm near the old forge. Marlowe stopped sleeping. He started drinking just like Drummond had centuries before. And like Drummond, he began hearing things, whispers in the sound of the wind, the ring of unseen metal echoing long after the night shift ended. The historian. In June, a historian named Dr. Valerie Grant visited the site after hearing rumors of artifacts being uncovered. She specialized in slave-era industry, particularly blacksmithing traditions. Her first step onto Fairhaven soil made her shiver. "This place remembers," she murmured. When she found the old forge foundation, she went still. The bricks, half buried and blackened, still held traces of heat. She pressed her palm against one. It felt faintly warm, as if someone had just stoked a fire inside the earth. She returned the next day with equipment, but everything she'd marked, every brick, every shard, every sample, was gone. The only thing left was a single word scratched into the dirt beside the site: work. Dr. Grant published nothing. A month later, she checked herself into a clinic in Columbia, rambling about a voice in the fire that won't stop ringing. The return. By autumn, the Oaks at Fairhaven project had collapsed. Investors pulled out, insurance premiums skyrocketed, and the land went unsold again. The county declared it protected marshland. But locals began reporting strange things: lights on the water at night, faint hammering that carried through the fog, and a smell of burning iron that lingered after rain. One fisherman claimed he saw a figure standing in the shallows at dawn, tall, broad-shouldered, back turned, holding something like a hammer. When he called out, the man looked over his shoulder. His eyes glowed orange like coals, and then he vanished into the mist. The fisherman quit the river for good. The letter, in 2004, a letter surfaced at the Georgetown Historical Society, unsigned, typed on a yellowed typewriter. It was addressed simply, "To whoever still keeps record." It read, "The blacksmith was never buried. You cannot bury a man made of work. He forged something stronger than chains, memory. And memory does not die. Every time a hand touches iron in this county, it remembers him. The hammer keeps falling because we have not yet learned what it was meant to teach." The curator framed the letter. 2 weeks later, the glass cracked, 5 fractures radiating outward like fingers. The echo today, 200 years after the first hammer fell at Fairhaven, the land remains untouched. Developers avoid it. Surveyors' equipment malfunctions there. Compass needles spin. GPS shows blank screens. But on windless nights, when the moon hangs low over the Waccamaw and the marsh water lies still, people say the air trembles, faintly at first, to then stronger, and then the hammer starts again. One strike for every year since Samuel's defiance, a rhythm the land will not forget. A heartbeat made of iron, pulsing beneath the mud. If you stand there long enough, the sound grows clearer, close enough to feel it in your ribs. And sometimes, just before it stops, you can hear a second sound, and softer, almost human. A woman's voice singing an old lullaby. The same one Clara sang to the children she lost, to the husband who vanished, to the fire that never died. The journalist arrived at Georgetown on a grey winter morning in 2025. The kind of morning when the sky feels too low and the river smells of iron. Her name was Lena Ward, investigative reporter for a digital magazine that specialized in deep-dive exposés on forgotten histories, slavery, superstition, lost towns, and places that refused to stay dead. She hadn't meant to come to Fairhaven. It was a detour, a whisper in the archives. While researching post-bellum rice plantations, she'd come across a name scrawled in a century-old margin. Fairhaven, don't dig there. That was all it took. Lena had built a career chasing the kind of stories people said were cursed. The forgotten coordinates Fairhaven didn't appear on any modern map. It existed between property lines and bureaucratic blindness, officially protected marshland, unofficially abandoned. But an elderly librarian in Georgetown pointed her to a file no one had opened in decades. A yellowing folder stamped Federal Hold, 1964. Inside were fragments, photos of rusted chains, the melted pistol recovered in 1865, and a letter typed on brittle paper, unsigned, dated 1904. The hammer keeps falling because we have not yet learned what it was meant to teach. At the bottom of the file was a hand-drawn map. The librarian's hand trembled as she traced the route with a pen. "You'll find nothing there," she said. "But you'll hear him." Lena smiled the way only skeptics do when curiosity outweighs common sense. The road to Fairhaven. The dirt road wound through cypress and silence. The only sound was her tires cracking over gravel and the occasional hiss of wind through reeds. Her GPS blinked out 5 miles from the site, a digital gasp before total blackout. When she reached the clearing, her headlights caught the ruins, a scatter of bricks, a few stone foundations swallowed by vines, and a single chimney leaning like a gravestone. The air felt heavier there, not thick but aware. She stepped out of the car. The mud clung to her boots like it wanted her to stay. Somewhere beyond the trees, metal rang, once, twice, 3 times. She froze. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, the sound of someone shaping something, not random clatter. "Wind," she muttered, though the air was still. She turned on her recorder. Fairhaven site, first impressions overgrown. Possible remains of a forge or storage structure near the center. Strange acoustic echoes, metallic resonance. "We'll investigate." Her own voice sounded too calm. The discovery. She found the forge's foundation by accident, tripping over what she thought was a stone. It wasn't. It was a brick, blackened, warm to the touch. She frowned. The rest of the structure was mostly gone, but in the middle of the ruins, half buried, she saw a dark lump of metal. At first, she thought it was just scrap. Then she saw the shape, an anvil small but unmistakable, its top etched with shallow grooves like veins. Her phone buzzed. One message from her editor. "Stay careful. That place is bad news." The screen went black before she could reply. She crouched beside the anvil, brushed the dirt away. For a second, she thought she saw something reflected in its dull surface. A face, eyes glowing faintly orange. But when she blinked, it was gone. The air shifted, warmer now, and the faint smell of smoke rose from nowhere. Her recorder crackled. "You came back." The voice wasn't hers. The voice. She froze, staring at the recorder in disbelief. The tape hissed, then repeated, "You came back. The work isn't done." Lena's throat went dry. "Who are you?" she whispered. You know my name. She replayed every file she'd read, the plantation ledgers, the court records, the whispers of the Fairhaven Smith. Samuel, she said. The air pulsed. The smell of iron deepened. Around her the wind picked up, though the trees didn't move. You dig for stories, the voice said. I dig for truth. You think you're the first to come here and ask? You all come. You all leave with your hands black. Lena's heart pounded. What do you want from me? Person, nothing. What's left of me doesn't want. It remembers. Her flashlight flickered. For an instant the forge wasn't ruin anymore. It was alive. Fire glowed inside, sparks danced, a hammer rose and fell. And the man wielding it looked up, his eyes two burning embers in a soot-streaked face. Then it was gone. The truth in the ash. She stumbled back, gasping. The recorder kept running. You want to write it down, the voice said. Then write this. We were not ghosts. We were work. We built their world with our blood, and when they tried to erase us, the iron remembered. The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged. The voice grew quieter, distant. Every chain, every nail, every gate they made, I touched them. They carry my mark. The world you walk in still hums with it. You call it progress. I call it proof, Lena whispered. You're saying, it's all still alive? Not alive, awake. Her knees nearly gave out. She pressed a trembling hand to the anvil. It was hot again, impossibly so. Through the metal she felt something beating, slow, steady, a heartbeat. When they forget the cost, the voice said, the hammer reminds them. The journalist's choice. Lena backed away, shaking. I came to tell your story, she said, to show people what happened here. Then don't tell it like a ghost story. Tell it like history. The fire flickered once more, illuminating shapes behind her, faint silhouettes. Hundreds of them, men and women standing among the trees, faces proud, scarred, unbroken. They faded as quickly as they'd come. The recorder clicked off. The silence that followed was pure and absolute. The departure. She left before dawn, mud streaked up to her knees, hands blackened from the anvil's soot. When she reached her car, her reflection in the window startled her. There was a faint handprint burned into her left palm, dark and perfect. Back in Georgetown, she played the recording. The voice was gone. Only the hammering remained. Clang, clang, clang. It echoed through her speakers until the battery died. She wrote her article that night, a 10,000-word feature titled, The Man They Tried to Erase. It was raw, factual, stripped of superstition, but the subtext burned through every line. It went viral within hours. Historians called it haunting. Activists called it necessary. And on the day it published, workers renovating an old courthouse in Charleston reported a strange sound from the basement. A hammer striking iron. 3 times. 10 years passed before she went back. By then, the article had become more than a story. It was a movement. Universities taught it, protesters quoted it, and historians finally said his name out loud. Samuel Hewitt, the blacksmith of Fairhaven. Lena Ward had built a reputation she never wanted, the journalist who gave voice to the dead. But she couldn't forget the forge, the way the air had trembled, the voice that had said, we were not ghosts, we were work. She told herself she'd close that chapter, but the hammer never really stopped. Sometimes, lying awake in her apartment in D.C., she'd hear it faintly under the hum of the city, that same deliberate rhythm, clang, clang, clang. A pulse under the noise of civilization. When the nightmares started, the smell of smoke, the sound of whispering chains, the image of a hand reaching through fire, she knew what she had to do. She booked a flight to Charleston, and from there, she drove back to Georgetown. The return. The road looked different now, paved, lined with streetlights, but the air changed the moment she crossed the old boundary. It grew heavier, thicker, like the world holding its breath. The land was still protected marshland, untouched since the failed resort project. The locals called it the place where the ground hums. When Lena parked near the tree line, her car radio flickered. For a split second, every station, gospel, news, static, played the same sound, hammer on metal. Then silence. She stepped out and walked toward the ruins. The forge was almost gone, swallowed by weeds, half sunk in mud. But the air above it shimmered faintly, heat without fire. Something inside the earth was awake. She knelt beside the cracked bricks. "I came back," she said softly. "You told me to tell it right." "I did." The wind stirred. Then, clang. Once. Clang. Twice. Clang. 3 times. The vision. The ground beneath her hand grew warm. The world blurred. And suddenly she wasn't in 2025 anymore. The forge was whole again, glowing, alive. Men worked the fields under the sun. Women sang to children in the shade. Clara stood by the river with baby Ruth smiling. Samuel was at the anvil, hammering, each strike sending sparks that turned into faces. The faces of the enslaved who had lived, labored, and died there. He looked at her. The same eyes, molten, endless, knowing. "You understand now?" Lena's voice broke. "You weren't haunting them. You were building something. Freedom is forged, not found." He lifted the hammer, glowing red, and pointed it toward the horizon, not at vengeance, but at memory. "They made me a weapon. I became a witness. The fire doesn't burn for revenge. It burns to remember." As he struck again, the scene dissolved. Sparks scattered upward, each turning into a star in the night sky. When Lena blinked, she was back in the ruins, but the stars above seemed closer, brighter, like the hammer still echoed in their light. The revelation. She returned to the car, shaking. Her recorder was running. It had captured something, and not words, but rhythm. A heartbeat of metal. She played it back. 3 slow strikes. Then silence. Then a final sound, faint, but clear. A woman humming. Clara's lullaby. Lena wept, not from fear this time, but understanding. Samuel hadn't died in rage. He'd transformed it. His spirit, his work, his fire, they'd become part of the world itself, woven into every piece of steel shaped by human hands, every bridge, every engine, every tool. He had turned cruelty into creation. He had forged memory into the bones of progress. The monument. Months later, Lena returned with a team of historians and descendants of the enslaved families once kept at Fair Haven. Together they built a memorial on the site, not marble, not stone, but iron. A single black anvil, polished smooth, set in the center of the old forge's foundation. No plaque, no inscription. Just one phrase engraved faintly across its side. "Work remembers." On the day it was unveiled, a crowd gathered. Children placed nails at its base, bright, rustless, symbolic of every life rebuilt from pain. And when the speeches ended, and the wind fell still, they heard it, faint, steady, echoing beneath the ground. Clang, clang, clang. 3 strikes. Then silence, but everyone there understood. It wasn't silence at all. It was peace. Epilogue. That night, as Lena left Georgetown, she stopped by the river. The water was calm, the moon's reflection rippling like molten silver. She thought of Samuel, a man they tried to erase, now immortal in every strike of steel, in every worker's hand, in every story that refuses to be buried. She whispered into the night, "Rest now. Your work's done." And from somewhere deep in the dark, faint but certain, came one last echo, a hammer's heartbeat. Clang.